Good morning and welcome again to the True Disciples broadcast. For the next 30 minutes, my goal is to inspire you, educate you, challenge you, and hopefully for some, activate you into a confidence of taking your Christian faith and engaging your culture. My name is Pastor Kevin Baird. I am the lead pastor of Legacy Church. We're located here in Charleston, South Carolina. I've been a pastor for nearly 30 years, been college professor, an academic dean, conference speaker. I'm also a husband, a father, overall nice guy, and going to be a grandfather in the not-too-distant future. So we're super excited about our first grandchild coming along. I'm also the executive director of the South Carolina Pastors Alliance, a network of nearly 300 pastors in this state who are linked together to help activate clergy to use their influence for faith, family, and freedom. And I am so glad you're listening to the broadcast today. We welcome you. Hopefully many of you found our new time slot even last week when we began a discussion that we will continue today, because I have a very special guest with me back again here today, a local pastor in the area, Dr. Bobby Eubanks from Ridge Baptist in the Summerville area. Dr. Eubanks, thank you again for being with us on the program.
Thank you, Kevin, for having me. It's been a pleasure getting to know you this past year or two as we've worked together and some issues that God's placed in our hearts. And I look forward to being with you this week, and as I was last week, and on the issues that we're talking about.
Absolutely. And I mentioned to those that were able to tune in, and by the way, if you were not able to hear last week's broadcast, you can go to YouTube and punch in Legacy Media, put my name in there as well, and you will find all the True Disciples broadcasts, and you can hear this one as well. But we opened up the can last week on probably the greatest human justice, civil rights issue of our era, the issue of abortion. And we began to talk to you, Dr. Eubanks, about how you got involved in this particular issue, and you've been a general in this locally in the area. We got connected in sort of a unique way when you were able to see that I was getting active in this area as well. And so we become allies as pastors in order to address this. So I appreciate your experience and all that has meant to me.
Thank you, Kevin. It's been a battle for like 28 years for me. I've been in the area and I've been fighting this. And I felt alone. I knew the Catholic priests, and a lot of them were, very vocal. But other than that, it was hard to find a group. But you have worked diligently to get in touch with pastors and through the South Carolina Alliance thing. And then I tried to start a group unsuccessfully, as I mentioned last week. But however, it's refreshing to see your enthusiasm and your zeal, to see an evil in our area particularly go away. And right now, with the state alliance with MUSC connected with this abortuary, it's pretty solidly fixed, and it appears that it's not going to go away until we can break that bond.
Absolutely. Well, and again, I appreciate you and your mentorship and your faithfulness in this area, and only wish I could have got to the battle line a little quicker than I did. And when you're saying you weren't that successful, there are days I'm not sure I feel all that successful. My joke is trying to gather pastors to engage is a lot like herding cats. It's
cats
not
with
easy.
no eyes. Cats with no eyes and two legs. I mean, it gets worse.
It's challenging. And so if you're a pastor listening, contact us. We want to get you involved. And if you're a believer and you're listening, perhaps you're even on your way to church, and you want to encourage your pastor, let me underscore the word encourage. Don't hassle him, but encourage him. And we would love to visit with him and see what we can do to help get his influence activated in the arena of public discourse. But we left off last time talking a little bit about addressing this abortion issue through various means within legislative process, as well as this connection that we're finding through MUSC, our prestigious medical university here in South Carolina. Before we jump back to the MUSC, this legislative session, we actually had, I think, what you could define as 4 pro-life bills that were before the South Carolina legislature, either the House or the Senate. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like one of them is going to make it through the process. You have any
No, you're exactly right. We've had even some of our local state representatives and senators who are on these committees. One of them's right over here in Mount Pleasant. And he basically has given us little help at all as far as getting these bills out of committee. We got a couple of them out of committee, but most of them remained in subcommittee. And we don't want to go into the legislative process, but there are certain ways that one House member or one Senate member can actually hold up a piece of legislation by just sitting on it in his office. In other words, he's on a committee and he has 3 committee members, and he's the chairman of the committee. He don't even have to introduce the bill if someone gives it to him, or he can hold it off knowing the process. It may never get out of committee. And if it doesn't get out of committee by a certain date, it never gets to the floor.
Right.
And that's what happened to us. There was a lot of stonewalling going on. And, we've got our suspicions why. Human nature tells us that abortion is an evil from a Christian perspective, but there are a lot of people see it as a convenience, that if you find yourself in an unwanted pregnancy, either yourself with maybe a girlfriend or someone, a mistress or something, this gives you an avenue to get rid of the baby or the evidence, or a person who's not married, a teenager. A lot of these are teenage girls, and the parents don't want a biracial child, or they find out, there's with a family or someone else they don't want to have, the child from. They can go to these abortuaries and get rid of them. A lot of these senators know of these situations, and a lot of these state representatives. And every time we take legislation up there, it's almost like there's an unspoken, all right, guys, we hear what you're saying, something needs to be done, but we're not going to touch this. And we have our reasons. But human nature, and as a pastor being out among people, among the sheep, as Kevin is, we know that, we don't like pain, we don't like suffering, and sometimes an unwanted pregnancy presents itself with a lot of issues that these girls want to get away from quickly, and even parents and people panic. And these senators and state legislators, I'm afraid, carry a lot of guilt that they know people who have done this, or they have family members who have done this, and maybe even themselves. I don't know. I'm not one to judge them. But there's a reluctance when you've been through something like this to stand up and say, we need to end this, because by ending this, we're almost judging them. And that's not the case. We've got people who we know are Christians who, in their early years before they became Christians,
Absolutely.
had abortions. And now they speak out in the churches pleading with people, hey, if you've had an abortion, God can forgive you. Help us stop this. And these state legislators aren't listening. And I wonder, what their reasoning is, because their logic, they've never really given us a logical answer, Kevin, at all that I can see.
No, they haven't. And I wanted to spend just a moment on this subject, because we had a 20-week fetal pain bill that I was just reading in the paper that they said was the only one that even had a slight chance of making it through, which was disappointing because, as you're well aware, in this state, abortions aren't performed over 16 weeks. And so to have a 20-week fetal pain bill is just ridiculous. It doesn't even address anything substantively, and to me, it's just a bone being thrown to us in sort of a patronizing way that says, hey, we're trying to do something. We had personhood come up, which defines life inside the mother's womb as a human being. And just simply asking, what else would you call it? I mean, a fetus is Latin for baby. Whenever someone's pregnant, they say we're having a baby. This is a human being. And we seem to find a lack of leadership within the political class to be able to take a stand on something that seems to be as simple as personhood.
Exactly. And their argument is, well, one of the arguments I've heard through the grapevine was, well, the Supreme Court's ruled in 1973 that, that abortions are legal and states can't oppose them. Well, that's true. However, if we pass legislation declaring the personhood of the individual, the 10th Amendment gives us the right as a state to refuse to follow any legislation or even to defy the Supreme Court if we see it's not. And so if South Carolinians declare a personhood of the child, which to me the Bible's already done that, why should we have to do that? But unfortunately, that's the way it is. Then it doesn't matter what the Supreme Court or anyone else says. South Carolinian says we're not going to kill babies. And the personhood bill would do that. And it would recognize that in that womb, hey, if a mother's pregnant now and someone kills her and kills the baby, they'll prosecute that person in South Carolina for two deaths.
Homicides. Exactly.
So what's the difference when an abortion, the girl gives permission for that to be done? And I'm going, something's not right with this.
Yes, I call it legislative schizophrenia. They just they can't think consistently. Another one this session was for a pregnant woman to stand her ground, that she could exercise deadly force on behalf of her unborn child with regards to somebody assaulting her. and that it was based around the understanding that she's defending her baby. I was actually in hearings, and you may not know this. I was actually in hearings listening to the discussion, and there were pro-choice people who were advocating against a pregnant woman being able to stand her ground and defend her unborn baby against an assault. There were people who were standing against that legislation. It boggles the mind.
Well, the Old Testament said that Israel got in situations in their history where right became wrong and wrong became right. And everybody did what was right in their own eyes. And that's where we are, because it's clear to me that God says from the beginning that the womb, is sacred. And, there's passages in Psalms, there's passage in Jeremiah that God knows us in our womb. I mean, Jesus, kicked in the womb. And so we are identified as human beings at the moment of, conception, and we enter this world. And yet somehow our legislators and it's where we are. We've left the Bible. We left God. This is the result. We don't know our way. And we're trying to make up our rules and our guidelines as we go, but it's self-destructive. If you kill, for example, we've killed close to 60 million. Do the math. And I've done the math and just playing around with numbers. We've killed 60 million people. And I took 35 million and multiplied that number times the economy of an average person working today, which they say is around 47,000. That's including rich and poor. Stay with me just for a moment. You take 35 million people, if they hadn't have been aborted and were living, they'd be working. And you multiply that times the 47,000. Yes. You know what number I came up with? $17 trillion. And at last, the thought I heard, we were $17 trillion in debt. Here's my point. People are your economy. People are your culture. People are your life. You kill people, and they don't live. Who's going to take care of your old people? We've got a Medicare crisis going on. We've got 70 million people growing old at the same time. Look at the generations behind us. We've killed 2 generations of children who would be working, taking care of their parents and grandparents, but we've lost them. And in the place of them, we brought in immigrants who aren't even on the radar and aren't paying taxes and stuff, and that's another burden to your culture. And my point is this: if abortion doesn't end soon, there's no chance to get out of this. America will collapse.
Absolutely.
Because we've killed our greatest resource is not money, it's not gold bullion, it's not natural resources. The greatest resource America has is children. And we've killed them to the tune of 60 million. And the Bible is clear. When you do something of that atrocity, kind of atrocity, you're going to pay for it dearly.
Absolutely.
And we are.
And the irony that you mentioned with all of that is not only the numbers, which it's amazing that it matches like that. But think of the greater irony of the former Soviet Union, who had abortion on demand. In fact, we did a lot of ministry in Russia, and we meet women all the time. I mean, 5, 6, 7 abortions is not an unusual number to find in Russian women, because that was just the culture that happened there. And yet, no matter what you think of Vladimir Putin, he knows that his nation could not survive, and so they're standing up now and advocating for a culture of life. They're looking at their population saying, we can no longer do this and sustain ourselves as a nation.
If we don't have babies.
Exactly. If we don't repopulate and have larger families. And yet, here we are in Russia seeing this take place.
Well, not only that,
America.
Kevin, history has shown, and I don't want to give you a history lesson, but when Russia fell in 1980, Reagan, I was living then, and Reagan said, tear down that wall. All right, well, a lot of people said, well, America's might and the Cold War finally broke the back of Russia. No, history did. When the revolution started, they started killing people to the tune of 60 to 80 million people over about a 40, 45-year span, purging the nation. Well, what they did was a lot of these people were young people and different ones who were fighting against. So what happened was the country grew old, and they could no longer, their economy died because they had no one to take the other person's job. And that's what's happening. Go back and look at history. You kill your heritage. That's why the Bible says children are a heritage unto the Lord. He said, blessed is the man whose quiver, like arrows, are full of them. Mm-hmm. And what God is saying is, you want to take care of the old generation, honor your mother and father, you got to have children to do that. We've killed 60 million people. And you think God is going to wink an eye? And 40 years have gone by. 40 years last year. 40 years are always a sign, that number is a sign of judgment. God's given us 40 years to correct it. We haven't corrected it. I fear I fear for what's going to happen to this nation in the days ahead because our heritage is gone. Can we reverse it? Yes. We end abortion within 10 years. And people say, all these babies, how are we going to afford it? Babies generate economy. You got to buy diapers. You got to buy bottles. You got to, and people generate, it creates jobs. And you
absolutely
economy. People got to have cars.
How many entrepreneurs were in that 50 million, 55 million, I think now. Labor,
scientists, research.
Absolutely.
You kill your heritage, and God had this plan set up a long time ago. Hell knows His plan, and God commanded him to go and multiply and fill the earth. And then you got these wackos out there. Well, the earth doesn't need but 5 million people. We need to get rid of everybody else. That doesn't even make logically sense. The earth can handle what God wants it to handle.
Exactly.
But it's not our decision to be God and end life.
Exactly. You're listening to the True Disciples broadcast here on WTMA 1250 AM, and we're so glad you tuned in. My name is Pastor Kevin Baird, and I have a special guest, Dr. Bobby Eubanks, pastor of Ridge Baptist in the Somerville area, a general in the cultural engagement challenges we have here locally as well as nationally as well. You had mentioned in your last answer, we have legislators, and I'll say their names. I mean, the head of the Judiciary Subcommittee, Senator Chip Campson, the head of the Medical Ethics, I believe they call it, subcommittee is another Republican, Senator Clary from the Murrells Inlet area. All of these are Republican. We are a Republican-dominated state, and there's an assumption, I think, on some people's part that automatically means everybody functions in a more conservative philosophical manner, and that's not always true.
That's not true.
And the reason I speak these names isn't that they aren't decent people or good people, but they're people for whatever their reasons. We're just finding ourselves challenged to get, it seems to me, some common sense legislation through. South Carolina is an overwhelmingly pro-life state. Our nation recently, according to statistics, has now tipped the point to where now we're, as a nation, a pro-life nation. I think it was 49-46 pro-life. I think they'll still allow some of the anomalies or the exceptions, but nonetheless, the philosophical understandings have shifted in our nation. And there are other states that have moved similar bills through their processes, and yet here in South Carolina, supposedly a buckle of the Bible Belt, and we're finding such challenge in our Republican-dominated legislature to move through pro-life legislation. It's just an unbelievable dynamic that we're facing now.
I wish we could somehow, and maybe be exposed one day, because at the end of the judgment, everything's going to be exposed. Nothing will be hidden. But their motivations, their reasoning for not wanting to pass these bills to make us even more pro-life, there's no explanation. They just kind of listen to our pleas for justice for these children, and then they say, well, we'll work on it. Then when they come back with the votes, they vote the same way they always have, and these bills get stonewalled. They don't even get to the main floor. If they could get to the floor and be debated,
and let them vote,
let the people vote.
Well, there were 22, which is one short. There were 22 co-sponsors on the personhood bill from the Senate. Now that's one short of half the entire South Carolina state Senate. Now think about that. Half of a body says we're co-sponsoring a bill, and that bill can't get out of a subcommittee. Now, I don't know about you, but that sort of makes my mind go tilt. How can half your colleagues say we're co-sponsoring it? It's not even support. It's a co-sponsorship. Their name is on it, and yet we cannot move this bill through a subcommittee. You're only left with so many, you're surmising what must be the problem. And if it can't get out of a subcommittee, then it must be members of that subcommittee or a chairman of that subcommittee is shutting things down that it can't get to 22 of their colleagues.
But Kevin, they're not explaining to us. Tell me, all right, if you came to me and said, well, Pastor, this is the reason why I can't do it. If we do it, we're going to get sued by the federal government. They're going to come in here and it's going to be a moot law. All right, that's an explanation. Can we rewrite the law, or are we willing as South Carolinians to defend ourselves under the 10th Amendment? I can deal with that.
Exactly.
But to do nothing and say, but they don't even tell us that. Now, if it's a philosophical thing in their head where they've been involved in one of these issues, or they have a family member, and by passing this legislation, it gives their family members or friends the impression that, hey, that abortion you did was wrong, and I'm judging you by passing this law, and they don't want to be in a negative light with them. I mean, that's twisted, but I mean, I don't know what the reasoning is, so I can only speculate. That we don't get any answers from these people. You know, if I was up there, you know, in a legislative position, you know, I'd give my constituents an answer. All right, I can't vote for this, and here's why. And then let it fall with the voters. You vote me out next year, fine. But I was honest with you, and this is the reason why I can't support this legislation. They don't even give us that. They go behind closed doors, and they come back and says, well, it got tabled. And we never know why.
Right.
Why.
And again, I think Justice Blackmun in the original Roe v. Wade decision left an open door because in 1973 we did not have the technology available, and he said that in the ruling. The technology was not available to be able to clearly identify when life begins. And I believe if the phraseology is right, he said, we'll leave that to the future, which seems to me to be the open door for states to come in now, 40 years later, since we have the technology to determine when brainwaves, heartbeats, you know, and we understand what's going on, to be able now to challenge that. And we just need leadership. We just need leadership who's willing to challenge the status quo of what we've endured for 41 years.
Well, I'm a God-fearer, so to me, technology, you can throw it out the window. Well, God says it begins at conception. So
absolutely.
I don't care what man says.
Well, you're
I have
absolutely
PhDs they have. You know, by the way, a PhD is a post-hole digger degree. So
or piled high deeper.
Yeah. Well, I try to be nicer. I go down in the grass.
But anyway, but again, we're just trying to operate in the logic that sometimes they use within those lawyerly legal circles to somehow move forward things that are just self-evident to people like you and I and believers.
Well, let me ask you this. When Obamacare came out, it had an exception clause. Remember this? That the states were not going to opt into Obamacare because abortion was tied in with it. Remember? You had to pay for it. So this other, I forget who the representative was, but he put in there with this option, opt-out clause of that particular area. South Carolina overwhelmingly said, we'll adopt some of the Obamacare stuff, but we want to be excluded from, you remember that?
Right.
So I'm thinking, okay, now that makes sense. I don't want any tax dollars going for abortions, indirectly or directly. Well, how in the world do you have MUSC, a state-supported agency, and now you do this with the feds, and now you got one here that you're supporting, and they're actually supporting an abortion clinic right here in Charleston in South Carolina? To me, that's hypocrisy. They're both the same. If you're not going to put money into federal-supported abortions, then why would you put money into state? Because the principle is we're not going to let people who are against abortion have to pay for abortions directly or indirectly through their taxes. Is that right?
Well, absolutely, and that's what
it's hypocrisy.
Well, you're right, and that's what the law, to me, again, now it's interesting because in this MUSC situation, which we brought up next time, and let me say clearly that we believe MUSC is a prestigious, wonderful medical university that has done incredible things to help bring life to people and children. They're children's hospital. Every day they're helping children stay alive and have a quality of life. Why would you want to tarnish that amazing reputation that's known across this nation by connecting yourself in even the most superficial of ways to something that is a blight, and it is darkness, and we've asked for information, and we've got it. We know that there are monies that are going out. We know that there are workman's comp things that are being picked up by the university. We know that there are certain insurance liabilities that are being picked up by the university. I have paperwork here that's obviously been redacted, so it makes me wonder, what exactly was redacted, because you always want to know. And we've asked for help from some of our legislators, and some of them have been extremely helpful in this regard.
Yeah. Senator Lee Bright, who is running again, he's a state senator, and he's very pro-life, and he's running as a candidate against Lindsey Graham. He has been overwhelmingly supportive, and then he's also taken this information because he saw the issues that were at hand, and he took it to the Attorney General, Alan Wilson.
Yes.
And said, you need to look into this because he said there's some violations here. And unfortunately, this is an election year, and these politicians are afraid to touch a hot button issue. But anyway, Alan Wilson's response back was that he said there was a loophole. So when you and some of your people talked with him what a loophole was, he wouldn't define
we don't know.
So how do you have a state law and then all of a sudden there's a loophole to kill people? I mean, that's scary stuff. And that's all we got from the Attorney General. And he's running for re-election. I'm not voting for him. I mean, I'm just going to tell you right up, I can't tell you how to vote and wouldn't use this program for that. But how can I, as a Christian, be in a situation where someone gives me a response like that? If he said, I'm going to investigate it and I'll give you an answer in a week or two. No, just a loophole. We, as Christian citizens, this is where we light our candles. We hold our officials accountable. And so we've got people who are helping us. We got people who are stonewalling. The governor's office was approached last October. And hundreds of letters went in. Yes. Kevin's church, my church, and we got no response. Then we got a form letter back that a fifth grader could wrote. And I mean, it was really sad. And when I called up there, 2 or 3 officials I talked with passed me from one phone to another, which I understand, the legislative process. And so finally I got to one lady, and she finally told me, Pastor, you're just going to realize the governor doesn't have time for this right now. And that was the answer I got. Well, 3 months later, I finally got a phone call, and a gentleman called me back, apologized. But at the same time, the governor's done nothing. So, why do we elect these people? Why are they up there? And we got people who are dying, talking about the babies.
Absolutely.
And our tax dollars indirectly. So we have a right, and as Christians and as citizens of South Carolina and this country, under the First Amendment, we have all rights to speak out against this.
Absolutely. And I know you would feel exactly the same way. If we got it wrong, then just come out and tell us how we've got it wrong.
Give it to me.
If you're not underwriting them, then just come out and tell us you're not underwriting them.
Show us the contract, and they won't do that.
But you can't get phone calls returned. You can't get anything happening. And so here's what I'm saying. If everything that's out here is absolutely, you're crazy. You pastors are just crazy. Okay, we may be, but the fact of the matter is, then give us the real scoop.
Prove us wrong. If we're barking up the wrong tree, as they say in the South, the coon's not in that tree,
exactly.
And the other one, and our dogs are at the wrong tree, then we're at fault. Our dogs are not good dogs. But from all our sources and all the information we get, there's something stinks here, and it stinks bad. And it looks like a cover-up. With this election coming up in June, we're not getting the answers. And I know politicians, they don't like to be put on hot seats. But I'm not going to give you all the information, but I got some other people involved this morning, and they're going to follow it because they agree with us. There's something wrong. And so we'll just wait and see what happens. God has a way of ending things, and we've done everything we're supposed to do. And God's not going to hold you and me accountable for these children because the blood's off our hands.
Yes.
But He will hold these people accountable.
And if you're listening today, and boy, our 30 minutes goes quick. Dr. Eubanks, thank you for being with me on this program, man. We just started getting fired up, and we need a 3-hour program is what we need on these subjects. But I'm definitely going to have you come back, and we're going to tackle this because this is an area that we can find progress in. It just needs to take place. Progress needs to happen in this area. So thanks for being with us. Hey, real quick, I've only got just maybe 2 minutes tops.
Okay.
Real quick, tell us where you're located.
Summerville, South Carolina, off 17A. It's Ridge Baptist Church, Ridge Church Road. We have a website, ridgebaptistchurch.org, and you can get all the information directions there.
Absolutely. If you're in the Summerville area, check that church out. Pastor Eubanks, a great, great man of God. Appreciate it. Hey, and thank you for listening today to the True Disciples broadcast. As we mentioned, brand new time. You found it, 8 o'clock a.m. every Sunday morning. I hope you're listening as you're getting ready to church, or maybe you're even driving down the road. Remember, we've got all sorts of ways you can connect with us. LegacyChurchSC.org is the easiest one. You can get anywhere, navigate anywhere from that website at LegacyChurchSC.org. Obviously, we're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. You can pick this up if you want to share it with a friend and let them know the YouTube link as well. And anyway, make this a regular part of your Sunday routine as you're starting to get prepared to go to your local church and worship. Hey, if you don't have a local church, find one. Go to Dr. Eubanks. Come check us out at Legacy. Lots of great churches in the area. But remember this, take your faith into the public arena and you keep walking the walk and you keep being a true disciple. This is Pastor Kevin Baird. Until next time, God bless you.